Hey everyone, happy Thursday. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. I am Katie, joined by Chris and John. How's it going, guys?
Good. Just getting all the pieces together for a lot of fun today.
Yeah, so today, on today's episode, we are talking about fine-tuning large language models. And so everybody, and I do mean everybody, not just marketers, are talking about large language models. Specifically, you probably more commonly know them as things like ChatGPT and Google's Bard. There's also StableLM. So there's a lot of different types of large language models. But so today we want to talk about, just go over the basics of what they are. If you want to get deeper into the details of what a large language model is, Chris and I actually covered that on the podcast this past week. So you can get that at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast. And then we wrote about it a bit more in the newsletter. That's trustinsights.ai/newsletter, where we talked a little bit more about your readiness for a large language model. But today, Chris, we want to talk about, okay, you have one. What the heck do you do with it?
And more specifically, you have one, but maybe the public models, like the models used by ChatGPT or by Bard or by Bing, maybe they're not doing it for you, right? Maybe you've got something that is very specific, a very specific domain of expertise that the models just aren't as good as you would want them to be. And so today we're going to talk about fine tuning, because that is the way to get those models to do more of what you want. The best analogy is, think about it like a dog, right? Like let's say you buy like a bloodhound or something. You can train that dog to be like a bomb sniffing dog. It gets really good at sniffing out explosives, but in the process, it can no longer really sniff out like drugs or survivors in an earthquake, right? You've tuned that service animal to be very specific about one thing, like training a helper dog, a service dog. There's other things that it can't do anymore because its brain capacity has been focused on things, right? It's not going to run an agility course at the puppy bowl, right? Because it's helping its vision impaired owner navigate. So that's kind of what fine tuning is with large language models, where you're teaching them, hey, let's go ahead and do maybe one more specific task at the expense of not being able to do the more common tasks.
So what's the next step?
Well,
you're the expert here.
the next step is, unsurprisingly,
the 5 Ps. Goodness, who knew? Well, and you always have to start with, what's the question you're trying to answer? Why are you doing this in the first place?
Exactly. What is the purpose of the fine-tuned model, right? So if we think about what these models are good at, right? There's the 6 basic categories that the models are good at. There's generation, right? There is extraction, summarization, rewriting, classification, and question answering. And so what is it that you want a model to do better? Be focused on a specific task. Do you want it to write blog posts like a very specific person? Do you want it to be able to classify documents with sentiment analysis? Whatever that thing is, you've got to have that purpose established first.
I think what we're seeing, Chris, is a lot of companies are using these large language models purely for generation. That seems to be the most common. We've talked about this on past episodes, that it's not actually the use case that's best suited, but it's the one that is most commonly used. And so when we're talking about fine-tuning these large language models for a specific voice, that's really where we're starting to bring the pieces together.
Exactly right. So today, let's talk about, maybe you want to do some generation. Maybe Katie, you really want to just get some more free time, right? You want to spend some time out on the deck, right?
I would love that.
And writing content takes a good amount of time. So how would we get a model fine-tuned to be able to write more like you? What from your point of view would be sort of the people in the process before we start getting into the toys?
Well, I think for the people, obviously, if it's going to be a model tuned to my voice, we should probably start with me and what is my voice. And so, thankfully, in this instance, I've been writing the Open to the newsletter for well over a year. So, we have a lot of content to work with. If that were not the case, then before you get into fine tuning a model for a specific person, that person needs to define what their voice is and not just say it's warm, it's friendly, it's coherent. Like that's not detailed enough. So they need to provide writing samples that really demonstrate. And so for me, we have plenty of those samples. So that would be the people.
Yep. And then let's talk about the process. We've got a lot of content. Is all of that content useful for training? So let's take just a quick peek. So what we're going to show here is the back end of the Trust Insights blog. This is the WordPress blog, right? And so will see all sorts of great stuff. Now I could, and you shouldn't, just export this whole thing and stuff into a large language model. That's probably the worst possible idea. But what we see in here, things like who the author is, the date, the content of the post, the title of the post, what kind of post it is, the slug it's named, when it was last modified. And so you have all this information in here. From a process perspective, Katie, obviously we want it to be your voice, right? So we should probably know the author, who is the author. In this case, you're author 2 on the blog.
Okay.
But what else would we want to take into consideration?
I would want to do a little bit of analysis of the content I've written first. And I don't know if that, exists through this interface or if I would look into, a Google Analytics or a Search Console to see, okay, great, I've written a lot of content, but that doesn't mean that every single piece of content has resonated. And that's true for any author. And so I would first want to know of the pieces that I wrote, what are the top performing ones, and use those, provided that they are contextually relevant, not just, a throwaway post, but something that really demonstrates and aligns with what Trust Insights wants to be known for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you won't find that in this particular data set, and you're right, that is something that could be extracted. However, one thing that is in here is time. Would you say that your writing has improved since 2018?
I would like to believe it has. I mean, that's subjective, but I feel confident that it has. It comes a little easier to me, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. And yet in here is everything dating back actually to November of 2017, when we first actually created this website. And so we probably want to start by saying, well, maybe how far back do you think would you say we should go with that, where the writing is still representative of your level of comfort today?
Well, I mean, even if we went back 2 years to, April of 2021, I feel like that's what 52 times 2 is 104 posts to pick from. I mean, John, let me ask you. So, John, you thankfully, gratefully edit my posts just about every week. Would you say that they've gotten better? How do you spend less time editing them?
Yeah, it's definitely solid. Well, the biggest thing you can always tell, and you nailed it, it's in the speed of generation. When you're struggling, getting those first drafts out kills you. And then to be able to bang them out, in relatively less time always gets you on the mark. So yeah, because you start with, nothing on Monday morning and you've already got the idea spun up and the draft done by end of Tuesday. So yeah, you've definitely fallen into a cycle the past 2 years. So I think the past 100 would be good. The big problem we have, because I've done similar stuff with Marketing Over Coffee, is you have all these posts that are topical and timely, and nobody wants to read any of those MySpace shows that we did 8.5 years ago. So that's a real pain to try and figure out what stuff do you still want out there. But yeah, I think you go back 2 years, you'll be fine with everything that you've covered, and then we don't have to worry too much about timeliness with TI stuff, because we tend to be a lot more strategic, so that's less of a pain point.
All right, so let's do this then. Let's do a quick edit here. I'm going to say I want the title and the content from our posts where it's newer than April of 2021. It's a published post. We don't want anything that was not published. The type is a post, so no pages, no landing pages or anything like that. Katie is the author number 2. And we end up with 165 pieces of content. That seems like a decent amount. That's, you can see it's the so what post. We see all sorts of things. How do you manage expectations? This is all good stuff, right? This is the kind of stuff that we would really want to be focused on and teaching a machine to learn.
Now, what I would say, because I know our content inside and out, is that the so what posts aren't going to be super helpful in terms of training the large language model, because that's a template. That is, it's something, it's the recap of this particular live stream every single week. And we just swap out the topic and the links, but it's not representative of my writing. So what I would do if I were doing this is I would exclude the so what posts.
Okay, so let's go ahead and let's see.
And it will leave you with a lot less content, but it will be more representative of my style and tone.
Okay, so we're gonna have to do that in post-processing. I mean, I could sit here and do it in SQL, but I'm not going to. Let's go ahead and export all this data, all 165 pieces.
Okay.
And that's going to be sort of the first step. Now, the next stop on our tour is we're going to need to actually do some more processing on this data, because the data itself is it's not in the best condition. And let me show you what we mean by that. Let's open up our fine tuning here. And let's see. There we go. Clean that up. All right, so we have 165 posts. We have the titles, and we have the post content. You'll notice, it's a bit hard to see, but you'll notice that the post content contains HTML. And so this is not clean text. This is kind of a problem. It's not kind of, it's a pretty big problem. There is no way that you could feed this to a language model and have it create coherent text, because it's going to see a bunch of code, and you can actually throw it off and have it be distorted. Like the outputs would be all kinds of crazy.
Well, it's going to think that I'm a robot talking in HTML.
Exactly. So the first things we're probably going to want to do is let's take a look at this data. Okay, we're going to want to rename these columns. So let's rename prompt is the first column, completion is the second column. And then,
Chris, while you're doing that, I have a question though. So I'm guessing that a lot of people will be borrowing the content from a website. So you would have HTML, in almost all of those writing samples. Let's say I happen to have all of my posts that I want to use in like a text file or like 165 text files. Would I still run into the same formatting issues if it wasn't on a website?
No, it would be you would have different methods of ingesting the data. You'd like basically do a big file read, but you would also run into the trouble of how do you separate out, say, the title of the post from the rest of the file. So
the method of ingesting the content, each one's going to have its own set of roadblocks.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Okay, let's see if that's what we hope it does. All right, so yes, that's looking much better. Here's what we've done. Let's step through this. We've renamed the two columns prompt and completion, right? Because we're going to actually use the prompt. The title of the blog post is essentially the prompt. If you were to type that into a large language model, you would say, write a blog post about dark data mining, right? And you get the output. We're going to strip out everything that looks like HTML. So in that text, we're going to just rip that all out. We're then going to compute token length. So token length is the number of characters roughly divided by 4. Most large language models have a limit to how much individual text per piece they can take in. With the GPT-3 model, which is what OpenAI offers for tuning right now, is 2,048 tokens. With GPT 3.5, it's 4,096, and with GPT 4, it's 8,192, and soon to be 32,768. But so in this part, we're going to count up the number of tokens and also do a rough word count just to see what that looks like, and then give each row an ID number. And then, like you said, Katie, we're going to filter out so what, because you said it's not a good representation. So that leaves us with, we have our prompt, essentially, right? Accountability, where do projects fail? We have our text. You can now see this is no longer filled with HTML. Now this looks like regular, good old-fashioned text. And we have our token lengths here. So we have, for the most part, these look good, and a rough word counts. We're going to filter. We're also going to do another filter here. We're going to filter our token length be less than 2,048. That will, again, keep it from blowing up on us. That leaves us with 87 pieces of content that emphasize the voice of Katie. So we're another step closer to building our own Katie GPT.
I don't know if I'm excited or nervous about this. I don't know how you guys feel. I mean, you talk to me every day. I don't think the world needs more than one of me.
Remains to be seen. We will see how this goes. Could go way
Exactly.
off the rails.
So believe it or not, this is the hardest part of fine tuning, right? To select the data, to clean it, to think through how you want to process it. Because if you don't do this, you just pour it all in, you're going to end up with kind of a mess. Okay. Now, here's the question. For fine tuning, let me go ahead and just bring up a bit of thought on this front. You have a couple of different choices. You can do public models or private models. So a public model is using something like OpenAI's API to create a custom public model that you can then use in their cloud. So it saves you all of the pain of setting up your own servers and downloading an open source model and provisioning an instance and all that wonderful fun. But it's still a third party. So you shouldn't use it with PII. You shouldn't use it with protected health information.
Well, and I was going to say, I was going to ask, is there a risk to creating your model publicly in that hosted space? Like, sort of taking it to a more extreme, like, let's say I was a very well-known, very influential person who had strong opinions about things. Would there be a risk that somebody could access that model of Katie GPT and start spoofing my voice?
There's not a risk of them doing that with the model that you upload because it's tied specifically to your OpenAI account. There is a risk that somebody could just scrape your content publicly and build their own.
Well, thankfully, I'm not that well known, so I don't think anyone's going to do that.
This is, you highlight a really important point. This is something that's happening in the disinformation space, where people are grabbing text, audio, video of prominent personalities and using large language models and deepfake models to generate fake information. And there was a report put out a couple of days ago on Twitter. Russian-sponsored and sourced disinformation has increased by 1/3, by 33%, since the new management there open sourced the recommendation engine model. The hostile actors have figured out how to game it and are flooding it with all this extra propaganda because that is machine generated.
Yeah,
John, knock it off.
Just what we needed.
Exactly. So in this case, because this is Katie GPT for writing blog posts, we probably don't need the private model, right? We probably don't need something that is on our own hardware. Okay, so how do we do this?
Great question.
OpenAI does have a whole bunch of instructions on how to actually fine-tune these models, but one of the things we have to think about is which of these models do we want to tune? They have 4 models: Ada, Babbage, Curie, and Da Vinci. Of these models, the main difference is capability and then cost. right? So DaVinci is the biggest model. It can process 4,000 tokens. It's very, very capable. Does creative generation, whereas Curie does translation, complex classification, sentiment. Babbage does semantic search, and Ada does keywords and corrections. So let's go ahead and we're going to now start doing the fine-tuning process of getting that data file ready. So we'll go back to our... So there's our Katie training model. Now this part here, you got to read the directions, which is always challenging for someone like me. It's not my it's not my favorite thing in the world. But we're going to prepare this data file. So we're going to so you have to on your computer install these tools from OpenAI. They're command line tools. There's no nice pretty interface. I mean, I'm sure someone's selling a piece of software that has a nice interface, but for the most part, it's not going to be available. So you just use the command line. It says, and it will tell you, hey, here's what we think we see. Your file contains 87 prompt completion pairs, and generally we recommend having a few hundreds examples that performance tends to increase. It contains 2 columns of key per row. Additional columns are present. So it's telling us, hey, you probably should get rid of those extra columns. Some are these token length are going to be ignored. Let's see, what are the warnings here? It does not contain a common separator at the end of your prompts. You should have that. Your data does not contain a common ending at your completions. Completions start with a white space. So it's going to say, here's what we're going to do. You got to convert it to a JSON-L file, or JSON line file. We're going to remove those additional columns and add a suffix separator and saying, do you agree? And in this case, yes. I mean, we could do this in the R code if we were going to do this on a regular basis. But for right now, for convenience, we're going to go ahead and do this. So it's gone through. It's set up some stuff. It's done the fixes. Let's add the suffix.
I think this is the first time I've ever seen software offer to fix the problem for you. Like, it usually just gives you the big fat warning. It's like, good luck, sucker. But this time it's like, okay, so we see the problem. Do you want to just go ahead and take care of that, like concierge? It's actually kind of nice.
It is kind of nice. So we've gone through, and you can see now there is the JSON-L file of Katie, right? So it is. You can see there's the prompt, there's the completion, and there's all the text in it. And there's no HTML this time. There are line breaks, but there's no HTML, which is nice to see. Okay. Go ahead and close that file. We don't need to save that file. But now we've got our training file. Now here's the thing. Almost every language model uses this format. So if you were doing this and you decided, you know what, maybe I want to do a private model instead. Maybe you read through the data like, ooh, there's some stuff here that shouldn't be seen in the public. At this point, you can say, okay, I'm not going to use OpenAI. I'm going to use something else because you haven't done anything with the data yet.
So I could create, in some ways, if I'm understanding correctly, I could almost do like a head-to-head between ChatGPT and Google's Bard with my Katie model and just see like which one sounds more like me.
Exactly. That's exactly right. You totally do that.
I see a bake-off coming up over the next couple of weeks for us.
In the future. Chris, how about the models, the DaVinci and the others? Have you noticed any difference between those? Do you know what those different versions do?
Yeah, for it actually lays it out pretty clearly. It says like, here's what each of these models is good at. So we'll go back here. So Ada, it says this is simple classification, keyword finding and stuff. It's a very simple model. Babbage does moderate classification. Curie does language translation and complex classification, and DaVinci does generation. So because we're trying to make a version of Katie here, we have to use the DaVinci model for generating text. So let's go ahead and create this model. I'm going to find Katie's JSON file here, which we just had up, the Katie training prepared. And then the model I want to use is DaVinci.
So you are literally generating the DaVinci code here.
So,
wow.
Yeah, it will do that.
Well done, John.
And you'll see it says, hey, this processing, this fine tuning is going to cost $8.80, right?
Oof,
Which,
I
when
don't
you
know,
think about
guys. I think I'm worth it though. So let's
So,
go ahead.
Bargain of the century. Here we go.
you're definitely worth it. But think about that. That was 89 blog posts. That's it.
Right. I know. So if
Imagine.
I had, thousands, which for larger companies, I can definitely see them willing to make the investment to really, so let's say that, you constantly have a ghostwriter for your executive suite for their thought leadership pieces. I could see where, spending a couple $100 on 1,000 pieces of content to really fine tune the large language model on the CEO's voice would be worth it, and a huge financial savings down the line.
Exactly. And so the but the challenge with that is, if you're going to have multiple purposes, you're going to need to train multiple models. So like if you want to have a generation model for blog posts, that's its own model. If you want to have a question answering system, made for as an internal knowledge base, it's another model, and you'll have to format the data very differently than the way we did.
So I couldn't use this Katie GPT model to both generate and do Q&A with?
You can. It will do less well at the Q&A.
Because that wasn't the content we trained it on.
Exactly right.
Which totally makes sense. I mean, I feel like you would have some kind of a cooking analogy here of, some sort of like a classically trained French chef being asked to, I don't know, make Mexican street food or something. Which I'm sure they would do amazing. Still way better than me, but the point being is that it's a mismatch.
Exactly. And so at this point, what's going to happen now is this data set has been submitted. It's going to be loaded to OpenAI's queue, and then it's going to take probably an hour, maybe 2 hours to do all the processing. Because if you remember from previous episodes of the podcast and things, we've talked about how large language models work. Right? We talked about the architecture behind them. Folks will remember this lovely diagram. What it's going to do now is take all those blog posts that we put in and run them through this whole process, breaking them into individual words, calculating the embeddings, which is turning words into numbers, and calculating the statistical probabilities among them. And then what it's going to do is it's going to take the existing model that we started with, the Da Vinci model, and all of Katie's specific, unique ways of writing. It's going to change the weights in this model. It's going to say, for example, this phrase, the 2-word term vanilla ice, is going to get a boost in the tuned model because Katie uses it more than it appears in the general model, right? So it will change the probabilities of the entity known as vanilla ice and be more likely to generate that than it would be otherwise. So that's what's happening right now, is that all these blog posts are changing the underlying weights in the Da Vinci model to skew. You're intentionally skewing. You're creating an intentional bias to sound more like Katie.
Fun fact, I've only quoted Vanilla Ice once in writing, more so in... Well, so what's interesting is we didn't pull any transcripts from So What. And so that is actually where you would get more, I would argue, more of my personality than through the blog posts. So I am sort of interested to see, what the output is in terms of how well it does my voice. I do feel like my writing for the newsletter and for blog posts is very close to how I actually talk to people. But it's not going to have all of those additional like Katieisms and quirkiness, I think, that I would, get from a transcript of me actually talking or speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I think that'll be interesting. And, for people who are considering creating these models, that's something, so when we were talking, how do you get started? If that content doesn't exist, that might be a way to generate a lot of that content, is whoever you're trying to train the model on, just have them start talking, have a conversation with them, ask them questions so that you get those transcripts that then turn into the content to train the model on.
Exactly. Now, as I said, this is going to take probably a couple of hours for this to chew away on. When it's done, inside the developer playground, it will show up in a list of fine tunes that are specific to your account. So again, this is not something the general public would see. This would be something that is only available in your individual OpenAI account. And then once you have those fine tunes, you're able to use them for the different tasks that are available. This was from this week's newsletter. Do not under any circumstances use this. It was because I didn't clean the HTML, so it just generates gibberish all the time. It's also using Curie instead of DaVinci. So, but that's effectively it. So in terms of how do you fine tune? We've just walked through the process from end to end of starting with your data, cleaning your data. Actually, no, starting with your purpose. What is the purpose? The people and the processes, then get your data, clean your data, upload your data, and then ultimately make it available to the interface. Now, you can't use this in a chat window, right? This is not available in Chat GPT. This is available via either the playground or the API. So part of your purpose and part of the performance in the 5 Ps is how you're going to use this thing that exists and you paid money for it, but it's not as easy as a chat window.
That was going to be my question, is how the heck do I get to it? But I would imagine, if I'm remembering the different pieces, I could still build out a prompt the same way that I would in the chat window, but use the KD tuned model. Is that true?
You do it in the playground.
But that's I guess whatever you were just looking at. But so there's the chat GPT, there's the chat interface that we've all grown used to, and then there's the playground. But I could build a prompt the same way that I would in the chat GPT chat in the playground and get the result I'm looking for by using my own model.
Exactly. So it actually turns out it's got a ping saying that the DaVinci model is now available. Ooh. Right. So it says, here's your DaVinci Trust Insights model.
Now, can you rename those if you have like multiple?
You can. You have to do it through the API.
Okay. No, I was but more so just like out of a user. So let's say we had, 10 people that we built language models around, just sort of wondering from a usability, could we rename them to be like John's model, Chris's model, so on and so forth?
You absolutely could. So let's do write a blog post about the importance of skills evaluation in people management. Now let's see what our new synthetic Katie is like.
Katie is a hot mess.
Katie is a hot mess.
Katie is a hot ass mess.
So this is part of. Let's take a look here.
Oh, I love it.
We can figure out where it went off. So let's change the temperature just a bit.
Oh, if it printed HTML too, the browser might freak out. Oh, there you go. No, it seems to dial it back to.
Well, again, there's a data quality issue here, right? The data quality issue is that even though we removed the HTML, it didn't remove the links from the text, right? And so this model, this fine tune, has all of those links embedded in there, and it has no idea what to do with them because there's so many links in the text that, remember, a word is known by a company. It keeps the association of all these different words. There's so many URLs because we link to our stuff all the time. Right. We would have to now go back in through all this text and rip out all of those URLs in the plain text.
Man, I was so excited to see what I looked like as a computer, but per usual, I am just a mess.
Well, I thought it was going to be awesome. You'd be like, here's next week's blog post, done, boom.
I was so excited, but no, not so much.
Let down by technology again. Wah, wah, wah.
Yep. And this process also underscores it underscores the super importance of that data cleaning. But B, this is one of those things where you might want, if you're a shop that's going to specialize in this, Trust Insights, you will want to have a private instance, a private server set up to do your tests. Because this just cost us $9 for an unusable model, right? In terms of what's spitting out. That which again, not a huge deal. It's still, $9 fewer than we had at the start of the hour. Running this on like your computer with a smaller model will at least let you do the diagnostics and make the easy screw ups first.
Right, but so $9 here, $9 there, another $9. It adds up pretty quickly if you're not doing that work up front to really clean the data, which is, so there's, if you bring up, Chris, that slide with the 4 components, the prompt engineering, the prompt deployment, public and private models, those are the general services that you can offer and accept with all of this generative AI right now. But what's missing from this, and Chris and I were talking about this earlier, is that upfront sort of governance piece, that management piece of it, that's really going to help you understand, like, what are you even working with before you get to this stuff? How much content do you have? How clean is it? Is it usable? Is it relevant? So we just, we went through a very quick example of, we looked at all the blog posts. We said, cut out the so what blog posts, but we didn't do a deep enough dive to see there's too many URLs for the model to read it correctly and give you an output. So we have to go back and start over again and cost ourselves another $9.
Exactly. I asked it to simplify it. Say, write a post about B2B marketing, right? So it goes through how do you know which platforms you should use. So you can see it is doing what we told it to do. It is drawing from our content, right? There's the phrase that you use every single week in the newsletter, right? Which is part of what's been ingested is the free Slack group Analytics for Marketers. So this is very clearly us. This is very clearly the Trust Insights blog. This is very clearly the things that we talk about. And you could see we didn't have to do a whole lot with the prompt because it's fine-tuned our data, but it's still a mess.
It's still a mess. So am I. It's okay.
Yeah, I don't know though. Paragraph 4
you can also see I'm not doing a great job of staying focused. That's something I'm working on.
No, like that. Yeah,
that is me.
Totally your conversational style, though. That is your sentence structure there. It did totally grab that.
Well, and that is a really good call out, John, because when I write, I try to write in smaller paragraphs, more readable. Break it up, and it looks like it's doing the same thing. I do. Yeah. We have to save that sentence because even the machine is having trouble focusing.
And you can see, from the experiments we've done, this much more captures your tone of voice than even a really long prompt, right? This is very much Katie's voice. It's just needs a lot more tuning.
It does. Which makes me really excited for, Katie GPT version 2 when we get all of those URLs out of there, because I know from being the one who writes those posts, they're all roughly about between 600 and 800 words each. So there's a decent amount of content to work with in each of those posts once we get the URLs out of there.
Exactly. So that's the process, and I'm glad to see that this tuning went faster than I thought it would, of what it looks like to deploy a fine-tuned large language model. Now, again, you may, depending on your data types, want to run this privately or in Google Colab, maybe, which is a private secured environment. If you're working with sensitive information, you have to use a private model. I mean, if you want to be at all responsible and adhere to many probably NDAs you've signed, you've got to do it that way. But you can see that if you know the technology, it's not difficult to deploy a fine-tuned model. It's not like arcane surgery. The hard part is that data cleaning.
Well, I mean, to be fair, though, you were showing a lot of technical steps that are second nature to you. It's basically the language that you speak. If you said to me, okay, here's the steps, here's your, terminal prompt, and here's this and here's that, like, I would struggle with it. So I wouldn't necessarily call it, easy peasy lemon squeezy. I would say it's going to take me, some tears and throwing a couple of things and then begging you to do it for me.
That's a normal data load. Like
That's,
that's
I mean, I
that's
thought
the
you just say
ETL
that's a normal
process.
day. And I'm like, yeah, I know.
Dude, even for, world-class developers, I've seen many a developer cry, trying to get a file in.
It's true.
I'm good to go. I'm going to gather up all my medical records and credit reports and just fire it right into the model.
Yep. And if you think about it too, this also underscores how difficult it is to build a solid fine-tuned model if you don't have enough data, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talk about using this for analytics, being able to give a model some data and say, write some conclusions. Well, it's really hard to do that if you've only got 50 analyses, right? If you've only done 50 reports, which is a lot for a person to do. But for a machine, it's like, that's not really enough to work with. If you got 500 or 5,000, that would be better. And you're like, I don't think I've written 5,000 reports in my life.
Well, and if you think about other examples of machine learning that we've talked about in the past, that's that same example for predictive forecasting. The more data that you have, the better your predictive forecast is going to be. But if you only have, a small sample, like you may think a year's worth of data, wow, I collected a year's worth of data. Well, that 1 year doesn't really get into any of the seasonality or anomalies that you could expect. And so having 2 years, 5 years, 10 years is really going to be more useful. So it's the same with fine tuning these large language models. The more content, the more data, the more information you can give it to train on, the more representative it's going to be.
Exactly. So that's fine-tuning large language models. The process, which is sort of stages 3 and 4 of deploying these things to be as useful as possible. You can see from what we talked about today, it's not something that you can just throw over the wall and hope it all works out. The machines are not smart enough for that. And if you're doing it and you would like some help with it, or you just watched this and said, I'm not doing this, in no way in my right mind am I doing this, you would like some help with that, we're happy to help out with that.
You can talk to our chief statistician, John Wall.
I'm ready. 2 standard deviations to go.
Oh boy. Any parting words?
I want to know if you guys are going to create a marketing over coffee large language model and just have the AI start generating your podcast episodes.
Oh, that's a good question. At what point has there been any talk? Will we ever be able to upload audio files, or are we still stuck like having to generate transcripts to do stuff?
For the time being, it's text-based. The GPT-4 API can handle images, but no audio yet.
But not audio files.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's go clean up the mess that is Katie GPT and get her working. Someone's got to work around here.
Ionic Katie getting down to the business for us. Sounds good.
We'll talk to you all next week. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and our weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.